Coronavirus cases across the country are surging, but the good news is the death toll is not. And that's a very big deal because according to the CDC, new numbers show that the number of deaths is so low compared to the number of new cases that coronavirus might be about to lose epidemic status. Not only that, but the number of people with antibodies in their system has just been confirmed at 10 times the number previously believed. It's something I've been telling you for months. Again, it's good news because once again it proves that the coronavirus is not what we've been told. I'm Ben Swan, and this is Truth in Media. Hey guys, welcome to the show. And before we get started talking about these new numbers on coronavirus, a quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Create Tailwind. In fact, I did a long interview with them recently that really goes into depth about how this works. Create Tailwind uses Austrian economics and a system called infinite banking to teach you how to be a bank for yourself. You can learn much more right now at their website, createtailwind.com. Be sure to check them out. All right, let's talk about these new coronavirus numbers because as I've been telling you, the coronavirus cases across the country are surging. Of course, media and politicians jumping all over that saying, see, we told you that coronavirus is so dangerous. Now everyone must wear a mask at all times. We must get a vaccine right away. But hold on, because while the rate of infection is certainly rising and the number of confirmed cases is absolutely skyrocketing, interestingly, the death toll associated with coronavirus is not. And as we get far more cases on the rise and far fewer deaths, it creates a very clear picture that coronavirus may not even be a pandemic. On Friday, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported that the percentage of deaths in the United States has dipped low enough so that the nation is at the epidemic threshold, which means if the percentage drops any lower, the CDC will no longer call the coronavirus an epidemic. The CDC wrote that the percentage of deaths had declined for 10 weeks in a row, noting based on death certificate data, the percentage of deaths attributed to pneumonia, influenza, or COVID-19 decreased from 9.0% during the week 25 to 5.9% during week 26, representing the 10th week of a declining percentage of deaths due to PIC. The percentage is currently at the epidemic threshold, but will likely change as more death certificates are processed, particularly for recent weeks. Now, certainly, as we've seen a surge in the number of coronavirus cases across the country, you would expect that we would also see a surge in the number of coronavirus deaths. That has not necessarily been the case. Now, let's be clear about this, because while we're certainly seeing more cases right now, you would expect there would be a lag behind that of the number of deaths. Even so far, the number of deaths is not vastly increasing. In fact, what we are seeing right now is far fewer deaths in comparison to the tens of thousands of new cases being reported on a daily basis. The number of coronavirus cases in the U.S. is on the rise again, but the number of daily deaths is still dropping from the U.S.'s mid-April peak. This is likely in part because younger people, for now, are accounting for a larger share of new infections. Or the other reality, which is that 99% of the population is not actually susceptible to coronavirus in a dangerous way. We've known that information now for months, and yet politicians and those who are guiding our medical response to coronavirus continue to act as if that is not true, as if that has not been proven, even though it's been proven time and time again. What we know is that coronavirus is not dangerous for most people who are younger, who are healthy, and who have no pre-existing health conditions. We've also learned that children between the ages of 0 and 19 have virtually no susceptibility to coronavirus. But there is something else that we've learned recently that's very important here, and that is that the CDC's own numbers now prove that the rate of infection among people in the general population has been much higher than had been accounted for in the past. It's because of antibodies. See, when you contract any kind of disease, your body begins to build up antibodies naturally in order to fight off that disease. That is nature's way of creating immunity. Not for you to necessarily be vaccinated or to wait for some pharmaceutical company to come up with a way to protect you. Long before pharmaceutical companies existed, the human immune system was able to fight off disease and infection. And the way that we fight off disease and viruses is through developing antibodies in our system. You know all this, right? Well, here's what we've learned from the CDC recently, that the number of people in the general population who have antibodies in their system looks like it's about 10 times higher than the recorded rate of confirmed cases in this country. What does that mean? Very simply put, it means that far more people have had coronavirus already and didn't even know it than politicians or health experts have given us credit for. And that is significant. Look at these numbers. Take New York City, for example. Samples were drawn from March 23rd through April 1st. Nearly 7% tested positive for COVID-19 antibodies, implying that infections outnumbered reported cases during that period by 12 to 1. The CDC put the ratio of infections to confirmed cases in South Florida at 11 to 1, which is the same as the ratio estimated in Utah, where the samples were collected from April 20th through May 3rd, and in Western Washington, where the samples were collected from March 23rd through April 1st. Connecticut, where the blood was drawn from April 26th through May 3rd, that had the lowest ratio of estimated infections to confirmed cases at 6 to 1. Missouri, where samples were collected from April 20th through April 26th, had the highest ratio, 24 to 1. Again, this is very good news because what it means is that when a large number of people in any given space have already contracted coronavirus and developed antibodies to it, that we can then interact with each other without fear of contracting it. It also means that the coronavirus runs out of people to infect at a much faster rate. So again, it's good news. Number two, it means that as we're watching a surge in confirmed cases, if the numbers have been correct so far, whatever those numbers are, 8,000 more this week in Georgia or 10,000 more this week in Florida, as we watch those numbers go up, we can expect that about 10 times that number of people in any given state have also contracted it and also have antibodies to coronavirus now and didn't even know they had it. Again, based on CDC numbers. So if 10,000 new cases pop up in Florida, that indicates that 100,000 people have it and don't even know it. Again, good news as we move toward actual herd immunity in eradicating the virus. And lastly, it also means this. For politicians who have been pushing the idea of contact tracing as a way of dealing with coronavirus, the CDC numbers prove that that would not work. We don't need contact tracing because it would be ineffective. This is very important. Because of the fact that so many people in the general population have already contracted coronavirus and didn't know it, because so many people have antibodies in their system from coronavirus, a contact tracing program for coronavirus would fail miserably, because the idea behind contact tracing is to be able to follow where one person contracts the disease and who they come in contact with. But it only works if you know that the majority of the people who are coming in contact with that patient didn't already have the disease in the first place. So many people have antibodies already in their system right now that contact tracing would be completely ineffective. Again, these are things I've been telling you for months now, and yet we're seeing over and over that information being validated as data comes out. Now, lastly, why is all of this important? It's important because as we move into the next few months, what we have seen take place as a result of lockdowns that have wrecked the American economy and that have harmed tens of millions of Americans, as we've watched that happen, we need to recognize a very important fact. Politicians are now freaking out because the numbers are high again, and because the number of infections is going up, and the number of cases is on the rise. And so politicians are scared and are responding and reacting to that news by going back and pushing for continued lockdowns, continued shutdowns, people wearing masks, and they're pushing for these controlled situations again. But here's what we've now learned about coronavirus that's so important. Coronavirus rarely transmits outdoors. A study in China that took a look at over 300 patients and followed them around found that ultimately coronavirus rarely transmits outdoors. And yet where have politicians forced us to be for the last few months? Not outdoors, but indoors. And we know from looking at the cases in New York, where 66% of cases were for people who were sheltered at home, being shut down and locked down inside of a home or inside of a nursing home is not protecting the population. It's making the population more susceptible to this disease. And so we have learned that while politicians are saying stay inside, coronavirus doesn't do well. Where? Outside. Politicians are saying don't go to work, but we're finding that more and more people who are already out there have already contracted it. And so what we know is this, that ultimately coronavirus inevitably is going to run through a lot of the population. That's what we're seeing now. We were told in order to flatten the curve, if you just stayed inside, coronavirus would go away. But it didn't go away. It's still here and it's still around. And now we're watching cases surge. And again, ultimately, this is good news as we have learned that far more people in the population have antibodies, far more cases are on the rise, far fewer deaths. All of it good news, unless you're hoping to profit from coronavirus, in which case all of that is actually bad news. Guys, thanks for watching. Much more to come in the next few days. We'll see you soon.